Hello and welcome. In this episode, we'll focus on the 24 Hours of Le Mans from 1964 and 1965, featuring the Shelby Daytona. So we'll go from the Shelby Cobra in the previous episode to the Shelby Daytona. And when comparing the two cars, you can see the evolution of the design, and in particular when comparing to the design of the Ferrari 250 GTO by Pininfarina. Start.
P14. Okay, Dave, get ready.
So let's see how we go. Another 5-lap race against the AI with damage off again, because I want to be able to complete the race, or at least one lap. And as I said in the introduction, we're in the Shelby Daytona Coupe. And this version of the Shelby Daytona Coupe for Assetto Corsa is actually a third-party mod and a paid mod. So I'll include a link to the mod website down below in the description. And I gladly paid for this content because it allows me to continue telling the story of Carroll Shelby at Le Mans in the 1960s. Go. And I try to use the engine for braking rather than the brakes, because otherwise I'll end up locking out. And if you look closely, you can see the rear, the license plate on the rear says GOT HP, which I assume stands for GOT horsepower. At least I don't remember the details of that from the mod page, but anyway. This car is listed as keep quiet.
Okay, I'll keep quiet.
Telling the crew chief to stay off for now. I don't need him. Switch. And I'll also switch to a simpler version of the hood. This car is listed as a 390 brake horsepower, 4.7 litre V8, 4.7 or 4.3, at least according to Wikipedia, whereas the Shelby Cobra was a 500 brake horsepower, 4.7 litre V8. So on paper this car would seem less powerful in terms of brake horsepower, but it's faster at least. And this car of course was designed, don't spot.
Acknowledged. No more spot calls, please, Claire.
So I can turn off the spotter too, because I don't need her right now. Or at least I've chosen the female voice. So this car, as I said, was designed, before I lost my train of thought, this car was designed as a hardtop from the outset, more like the Ferrari 250 GTO, which it was designed to compete against and perform better on the Mulsanne straight. And as I noted in the previous and first episode, the Shelby Cobra was converted to a hardtop for Le Mans in 1963. So this car, which actually the basis of this car is the chassis of the Shelby Cobra. Try not to spin. And indeed, if you look down, you can see, or if I look down rather, you can see AC on the pedals, which is a nod to the AC Ace chassis from AC cars in the UK, which Carroll Shelby took as a basis for the Shelby Cobra, and adding the 4.7 litre V8 from Ford. And I should note that some may wonder, if I'm talking about Le Mans in 1964 and 1965, what about the GT40? And I have some notes that the GT40 first appeared at Daytona in Florida in 1965, and later, there's somebody going up the bank, and later in Le Mans in 1965 Ford took the GT40 but decided to change the engine at the last minute, which resulted in the fact that the GT40 didn't finish the race. So for this episode I wanted to focus on the Shelby Daytona. Those flashes I think are meant to be camera flashes, simulated for immersion I suppose. Somebody was asking me what they were. It's either that or they're trying to get you off the track. At least I don't need the pits right now. I will pit at the end of the third lap. I've noticed that even if I include enough fuel for 5 laps, the AI still seem to pit. I don't know what amount of fuel they're carrying, but I decided to limit my fuel to about 3 laps and I would pit and then do the last 2. So in the previous episode we talked about Carroll Shelby and how he won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1959 with Aston Martin, and due to the heart condition he had been keeping a bit of a secret, he had to quit racing. So he returned to the States, and in Santa Monica in California he set up a workshop for developing a new car, and in Riverside in California, a place called Riverside, he set up a race driving school. And following the Shelby Cobra, or around the time of the Shelby Cobra, I'm not sure exactly when, he hired a very young car designer called Peter Brock. Peter Brock had been working at General Motors on the Corvette and the Corvette Stingray, and Carroll Shelby hired him to work to design the new car. And legend has it, he on a napkin in October of 1963 he did some sketches of this car. And then in a period of about 90 days they developed this car. And what's interesting about it is, well, they were modifying the prototype as they went. They had a wooden frame they were working on. So over a 90-day or 3-month period they developed this car. Actually, now that I remember, there's a Jay Leno has a YouTube channel, Jay Leno's Garage, and he has this book review series on this channel, and he brought on Pete Brock to talk about a book Pete Brock had written about the Corvette Stingray. So I'll include a link to that video below in the description. So the name of the Shelby Daytona, or the Cobra Daytona, or even the Cobra Daytona, or the Daytona Continental, excuse me, came from the fact that the car was designed to appear at Daytona in Florida in February of 1964, and where it said the banked curve, because Daytona is an oval track, the banked curves of the track help to keep the car on the track due to the aerodynamic qualities of the car at the time, or indeed what was technically available, the knowledge they had rather. There's another video, there I go again, links upon links, one of those videos that YouTube recommends. Peter Brock was interviewed sitting in a replica of this car, and the video was very nice, a very touching video, because he spoke about the design of this car, and I learned some more things about him and the car from that video, and again I'll link to that below in the description. one of the things he talked about was the fact that after World War II, the Allies found notes on aerodynamic technology by German engineers, which they took back to America and handed over to the American car makers. And I think Peter Brock said that the notes were actually in German, which is kind of fascinating. And in one of the documentaries I watched, which I linked to in the first episode, they also noted that as part of the ongoing war between Ford and Ferrari after the war, it's possible that during World War II, that bombers manufactured in Ford factories in America may have possibly bombed Ferrari factories in Italy during World War II. So that's kind of crazy. And speaking of the banked curves at Daytona helping with the stability of this car, there was a British guy called Ken Miles, who was a tank commander in the British Army during World War II. He was either a commander or a sergeant, I'm not exactly sure. And Ken went over to the States after the war, and he was a test driver and also a mechanic while I tried to stay on the road. And Ken was known as Sidebite because of the way he talked, and also Teddy Teabag, which I thought was kind of cool, because apparently, being British, after a race or after a test drive or whatever, he'd be reaching for a cup of tea, which of course I guess was not common in the States at the time. More black coffee, I suppose, or Coca-Cola even, something like that. And it said that when Ken first drove the prototype of this car, that over 160 miles per hour the car started to lift, or the quote was, the steering became very light. So I guess that tells a lot. I think I'm going to have to pit now. I've done it so that when I was testing after a 5-lap race with enough fuel, what I should say was, I can add enough fuel for 5 laps, but I noticed that even if I do that after 2 or 3 laps the AI will still pit. So because they pitted, I added enough fuel for 3 laps, and then I would stop after 3 and add 20 litres and then continue. So that's what I'm going to do. It seems nobody's pitting right now, but there we go. Oh, I'm coming in way too fast. I was hoping that somebody would be pitting right now, so I could kind of pull up behind or in front of them. But let's see. In the previous episode I also changed the tires, which was kind of silly, which caused me maybe perhaps to spin out on cold tires, or it's just my crappy driving. I want to finish now. I've noticed that the AI here in Assetto Corsa tend to do some funky things depending on the settings, and of course it's tricky when you have a mix of, I guess it depends on the mix of cars and tracks you have. Some have noted that the AI in Assetto Corsa has its limits, and perhaps the development of the AI will now cease due to the fact that they've announced the next version of Assetto Corsa Competizione. Not that I speak Italian. and that will be a simulation of the official Blancpain GT series, which I guess means that, given that the series is populated by modern GT3 cars, that many of the cars in Assetto Corsa are pretty much already done, or because they're already here. Indeed, I own most of them myself. But they are going to, so the point being that I don't know how much vehicle development they'll need to do, at least 3D, from the 3D modeling point of view. But they are using a new software engine, the Unreal Engine 4, and they plan to include day and night transitions and weather effects, so that would be interesting. Which, when that appears, I think it's early access on Steam sometime in the summer, June I think it was. So that will be followed by many people, I expect. I don't know whether it will allow mods. I assume not, because it's some kind of official licensed product through SRO, which managed the Blancpain series. Keep me posted.
Okay, we'll keep you posted.
I can turn the crew chief back on. How's my fuel?
Should be about 3 laps of fuel left. 6.6 litres per lap.
Ah, he's actually correct now. After 2 laps, Assetto Corsa will quote your fuel, or estimate your fuel rather, but after 3 or 4 laps the crew chief will do the same. I added a bug report in the crew chief forums with some video clips detailing my problems, and there has been an update since, so maybe they fixed it, but not that I need it, because I have the app here on the right side of the screen anyway. But still, nice feature to have. It's kind of a useful thing to have. But it means, like I said in the previous episode, I don't need to be recalling keyboard shortcuts. And indeed, at the very beginning, I can use a command just to start the race, which means I don't need to have the mouse cursor on the screen at all. Although, there it just appeared for some reason. Can comment on the quality of this mod. I'm no expert, but it was updated recently, and at least I'm glad to have it, because it allows me to continue telling the story, like I said.
1 more lap to go.
Yep. Going to try and finish, and suddenly I'm last. I didn't even notice, but nevertheless, I guess I can gain a few positions here against this car's nemesis, the 250 GTO, and there's one right there, and hopefully I don't spin out, because that would ruin everything right now. Try and brake with it. It's difficult to concentrate and talk and drive at the same time, but I guess we can make a few positions here. Not very realistic with no damage, but never mind. It's just a bit of fun. So the guys designing this car, like Peter Brock, who was very young, 21 or 22 at the time, and Ken Miles, guys from different parts of the world with different experiences, hot rodders they were called, and they were taking all the info they had, all the knowledge they had and skills, and doing their best. And I noted that this car, the shape of this car, I noted this in the intro, but the shape of this car and the 250 GTO is kind of similar, especially at the rear with this kind of cut off section. That was part of the aerodynamic theory at the time, I guess. Some form of increasing downforce and reducing drag, I guess. I'm no engineer by any means, but I still get the concept at least. That one there looks like it's on fire. Wow, what's happening there? It's the 4th of July in Italy, or in France rather. Oh, that's interesting. Well, if he stops, I'll give him a push. I gained 3 positions, not too bad, I suppose. This turn is always tricky. I've spun out here many times. I'm using this auto throttle blip option in Assetto Corsa, which as far as I'm aware is this kind of automatic heel and toe option, which I haven't learned to do. Basically what it does is it revs the engine when you're braking, when you're slowing down, so it brings up the revs to stop the rear wheels, for example, from spinning. I haven't really learned how to do that, so I'm no expert by any means. Actually, one additional point, the display lights on this car light up when you turn on the lights. They don't in the Shelby Cobra, which Shelby Cobra was developed by Kunos, who developed Assetto Corsa. I don't know whether that's historically correct, and both of these cars also have 4 gears. I assume at least that's correct. But for third-party content, this is pretty much very well featured. Finished 11th. Not too bad.
P11. Okay, we're done.